Because the moment Harry and Meghan had to insist that their Australia trip was privately funded, the real issue was already sitting in plain sight. Not whether they were flying somewhere. Not even whether critics liked them. But whether a couple who stepped away from royal duty can still move through the world with royal symbolism wrapped around them and expect that not to provoke a reaction. That is what made this story catch fire. A petition in Australia gathered roughly 35,469 signatures demanding that no taxpayer money or official support be used for the visit. The group behind it argued that the activities were private and commercial and should be treated strictly as a private trip, especially during a cost of living squeeze. Harry and Meghan's spokesperson hit back hard, calling the petition ridiculous and insisting the trip was privately funded. On paper, that sounds straightforward. In optics, it is anything but. Because this was never just about who paid the bill. It was about what the visit looked like. And once a story becomes about appearance, tone, and hierarchy, the numbers alone do not rescue you. Privately funded may answer one technical question. It does not answer the emotional one. Why did this still feel, to many critics, like something hovering awkwardly between a royal tour and a branded celebrity circuit? And that is where the contrast becomes brutal. The last time Harry and Meghan visited Australia, in 2018, they were senior working royals on an official tour. There was no confusion about the category. The roles were formal. The symbolism was institutional. The expectations were clear. This time, they returned after stepping back from royal duties in 2020 and positioning themselves as financially independent. But public memory does not update as neatly as a press release. People still see the titles. They still see the history. And they still register the old royal glow around the event, whether intentional or not. That is the detail that really changes the story. When the public sees royal-adjacent imagery attached to a trip that also includes private or commercial-facing appearances, the scrutiny intensifies. Meghan was linked to a high-profile women's retreat in Sydney, and Harry was associated with a major speaking event in Melbourne. Even if those engagements are legitimate and privately arranged, they shift the tone. They make the trip look less like quiet philanthropy and more like a carefully monetizable, prestige-heavy itinerary. And once that impression takes hold, any suggestion of public cost becomes politically toxic. For many royal watchers, this felt familiar. Not because the facts are identical to past controversies, but because the structural tension is familiar. Harry and Meghan often land in the space between monarchy and celebrity, and that space is inherently unstable. Monarchy depends on duty, hierarchy, and public legitimacy. Celebrity depends on visibility, access, and personal brand. Those are not the same currency. You can blend them for a while. But when the optics turn messy, the contradiction becomes the headline. And this is where the sharper read comes in. The problem is not simply that critics dislike them. The problem is that the Sussexes still generate royal-level symbolic attention without royal-level institutional cover. That is a difficult position to manage. If a trip looks too official, critics ask why private ventures are borrowing public prestige. If it looks too commercial, critics ask why royal titles are still doing so much of the heavy lifting. Either way, the burden of explanation keeps getting higher. That is not a tabloid complaint. That is a structural branding problem. Which is why this petition mattered more than the number itself. 35,000 signatures is not the whole country. Their spokesperson was right, in a narrow sense, that it does not speak for all Australians. But politically and symbolically, that was never the point. The petition gave shape to a suspicion that was already out there, that the line between private travel and royal-style treatment still looks blurred. And once people start debating the category, the optics are already winning over the statement. In the end, this story is not really about one petition. It is about a larger discomfort that follows Harry and Meghan almost everywhere now. They want the freedom of private life, the reach of celebrity, the authority of royal legacy, and the protection of being misunderstood as neither too public nor too commercial. But audiences are getting stricter about those boundaries. And in royal storytelling, the most damaging question is often the simplest one. If this was truly private, why did it still look so royal?